You're looking at the cerebral cortex, a thin sheet of gray matter folded into gyri and sulci that covers the surface of both hemispheres and underlies every higher brain function. Its average thickness is only 2 to 4 millimeters, yet it contains some 14 billion neurons organized into 6 distinct layers. Let's explore its functional anatomy. Anatomical divisions and surface landmarks. On the lateral surface you can trace the central sulcus, which separates the precentral gyrus in front, primary motor cortex, from the postcentral gyrus behind, primary somatosensory cortex. The lateral sulcus, Sylvian fissure, curves below, marking the boundary between frontal and parietal lobes above and the temporal lobe below. Posteriorly the parieto-occipital sulcus divides parietal from occipital lobes, while on the medial surface the cingulate sulcus arches above the cingulate gyrus. Lobes and their core functions. Frontal lobe. Primary motor cortex on the precentral gyrus controls voluntary movement in a somatotopic map, homunculus. Premotor and supplementary motor areas plan and sequence complex actions. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex handles working memory, decision-making, and cognitive flexibility. Orbitofrontal and ventromedial regions link emotion, reward, and social behavior. Parietal lobe. Primary somatosensory cortex on the postcentral gyrus receives touch, proprioception, pain, and temperature inputs in a topographic fashion. Secondary somatosensory and posterior parietal association areas integrate sensory information to guide movement and spatial attention. The intraparietal sulcus organizes reaching, grasping, and eye-hand coordination. Temporal lobe. Primary auditory cortex on Heschl's gyri processes frequency, intensity, and timing of sound. Auditory association areas in the superior temporal gyrus interpret speech and complex sounds. Medial temporal structures, entorhinal cortex, hippocampus, support memory consolidation and spatial navigation. Fusiform gyrus recognizes faces, objects and visual categories. Occipital lobe. Primary visual cortex along the calcarine fissure receives input from the lateral geniculate nucleus and maps receptive fields. Extrastriate areas, V2-V5, analyze orientation, color, motion, and depth. Dorsal and ventral visual streams project to parietal and temporal association areas for action and perception. Cytoarchitecture and columnar organization. Every cortical region is built from 6 layers of cell bodies and fibers. Layer 4 receives thalamic input, Layer V sends outputs to subcortical structures, and layers 2-3 connect to other cortical areas. Neurons are arranged in vertical columns, functional modules about 0.3 to 0.5 mm wide, so that cells within each column share similar response properties, for example orientation columns in V1. Association networks and functional specializations. Beyond primary sensory and motor areas, large-scale association networks bind information across modalities. The default mode network connects medial prefrontal, posterior cingulate and inferior parietal regions, supporting self-referential thought and mind wandering. The frontoparietal control network dynamically links prefrontal and parietal cortices to implement cognitive control. The salience network, anchored in the anterior insula and dorsal anterior cingulate, filters relevant stimuli to switch between default mode and control networks. Language circuits. Broca's area in the left inferior frontal gyrus plans speech production and syntactic processing. Wernicke's area in the superior temporal gyrus mediates language comprehension. The arcuate fasciculus links them, enabling repetition and complex language functions. Sensorimotor integration. Primary cortices exchange information via U-fibers and long association bundles. For example, visual motor coordination for reaching relies on parietal premotor connections through the superior longitudinal fasciculus. Vascular territories. Blood supply to cortex arrives from cerebral arteries. The middle cerebral artery irrigates lateral convexities, motor and sensory homunculus. The anterior cerebral artery covers medial sensory-motor regions, and the posterior cerebral artery serves occipital and inferior temporal areas. Infarcts in these territories produce deficits corresponding to the functional topography, for example contralateral leg weakness in ACA strokes. Plasticity and experience-dependent remodeling. Neurons in cortex exhibit remarkable plasticity. Repetitive training expands cortical maps, while lesions trigger map reorganization. Synaptic strength is adjusted via long-term potentiation and depression, mechanisms underlying learning and memory. In sum, the cerebral cortex is a multilayered, folded sheet organized into lobes, gyri, and sulci. Primary areas receive and send signals for sensation and movement, while association zones integrate, interpret, and plan. Columnar microcircuits and large-scale networks work together to produce perception, language, action, and thought, transforming raw input into the rich tapestry of human experience.